Hi everyone, I'm Kriti. I'm the founder of Mantis. We are an ARR reporting and forecasting tool for SaaS and consumption-based companies. Welcome to the fourth episode of our podcast. Today we have Craig with us, who's the CFO of UpClear. Thank you so much for being with us, Craig.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Perfect. So maybe we can start with a quick introduction. Would love to know about your journey a little bit, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. I've been at UpClear now for just over 2 years. Came in as a CFO back in April, I came into a really exciting company, an exciting environment, and organization that has been around for over 16 years. It's a B2B SaaS company that sells revenue management, trade promotion management software to consumer packaged good companies, and a very dynamic, fast-moving company. We have a global footprint operating out of New York, London, Paris, and Hong Kong, and we have customers now in, I believe, over 25 markets globally. So yeah, very challenging, robust organization.
Yeah, and 16 years is a long time. How
It's
do
a
you
it's a long time, and a lot of credit has to go back to the founder and how we founded the company. It remains bootstrapped. We're pretty attractive for outside investors, for a company that's been around, has good branding, is in a good market position, that's also profitable. So we're not in need of any capital at this time unless we do something that's maybe along the roads of being inorganic or have some other exciting plans to bolster our organization in some way. But it's nice to be able to really fund your operations from your own balance sheet. So it gives us a lot of leverage and a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, and you're one of the rare companies in that case.
Yep.
And how has considering like it's been 16 years, how has the strategy fluctuated over the years and considering the current macroeconomic conditions? Is there something that you have changed over the last couple of years, or are you thinking differently?
We're thinking a little bit differently. I think that comes along with the expansion of our business. So we originally had started over in the UK, started building up a market there and a base of customers, came over to the US and have expanded in that region. Along the way, we also added some customers in the APAC region. There has been some shifting demands. As of late, we've taken a real hard look at our go-to-market strategies in particular. And an organization has been very fortunate to be able to upsell, cross-sell existing customers, expand into new markets with those customers has been very beneficial. In the shorter term, let's say the last few years, we've seen some challenges from our economic buyers. We're in a time of sticky inflation, high interest rates, and that's brought some pressures down on people's budgets, taking a real hard look at where they're consuming their OpEx expenditures. They're bringing heightened awareness to cost containment or cost cutting, as well as for our customers that are manufacturers for CPG goods. They've got to be very wary of that inflation angle. So there's been a time of sensitivity for people that are consuming food and beverage items for consumers. So they are obviously very focused on those efforts. And some of that actually feeds well into our product and our service, which helps them focus and run their promotion activities on a global basis.
Got it. And considering that we are in this environment right now, and for you, maybe there has been some shift because you're also going through that expansion period. What are the top priorities that you have as a finance leader today? And how do you communicate that to your GTM team or everyone else across the organization, make sure that they come on the same page?
So a lot of it comes from just very good communication and planning.
Mhm.
So we are in this, building up to go into what I'll call just faster growth. To traditionally been running at a pretty good pace, pretty good top line growth, but we're looking to expand upon that. So number one, we're doing is building out the right go-to-market team across BizDev, RevOps, marketing, and getting all those folks aligned on what our goals are. Really identifying. Honing in on what that ideal customer profile looks like and ensuring that our funds are going towards those profiles. We also have some nuances just given the global footprint. We generally serve middle market type companies, maybe 75, 100 million to a couple billion, but we do have outliers on both sides. So we've got to take that into consideration as well. And what's actually has to happen behind this is that our roadmap activities have to be aligned with the go-to-market team.
Yeah.
So there's some professionalization that needs to go on, cross-functional alignment with go-to-market, with product, with customer success and delivery to ensure when we land on new customers, everything appears to be a smooth process. And just generally speaking, we really have a focus on ensuring that our resources are put in the right place, and that they're effective at what they're doing. We're going to see with the investment in go-to-market, we're going to see some of our KPIs start to be impacted as we didn't invest as heavily in go-to-market in the past. And that's just going to raise more awareness about where our spend is going, what our ROI is going to be. And along the way, we're actually becoming a more and more sophisticated organization, looking to leverage more tools, up our operating cadence, and getting more out of our data than we have in the past.
Got it. And now, considering because you mentioned that earlier it wasn't a lot of investment in the go-to-market team, so that has been a shift, that has been a change. How are you again communicating to everyone across the organization? And you also mentioned that the KPIs are going to change now. So how do you look at past KPIs or the way you track them versus now, and what is good now versus what was the benchmark earlier?
So on the first part of that, generally speaking, we do a pretty good job communicating from a corporate level across the organization and across all the departments. That's done in a number of different venues, whether it's through newsletters, regular quarterly meetings that we go into detail about where the organization's focus is going and making sure that we're aligned with our annual goals and plans. So that's number one. And on the latter half, it becomes it's going to become a little bit of a challenge. So as I got here and I started to really start to leverage more of the data that we had within the organization, bringing it together, sorting through what we had and what we didn't have, more importantly, and then start to speak with the department head and say, what do you folks really need? What is going to be helpful for you? And start injecting finance into the different disciplines within the organization. And through those conversations, you start to yield what's important to them, what's important to the CEO. And then we find a set of KPIs that are going to be relevant to our business, to our goals and our plans. Part of what we do now in demonstrating that is we know, for example, that our CAC spend is going to go up. We know we're going to see some ratios in the cost to acquire ARR is going to go up, right? So all we really need to do is we want to take a snapshot of what we have done historically, set that baseline, and then continually monitor what we're doing. And I expect to see some things move out of line a little bit given the investment, but what we're really doing is tracking this and using it as a guidepost to say, hey, are we getting better over time? So we'll keep a tighter eye on some of those. And slowly what we'll also do is, instead of flooding the organization with 20, 30, 40, 50 KPIs, we're going to very strategically roll them out so that they're relevant, it can be understood, and people know what levers and buttons they can push and pull to make those metrics move in a positive trajectory.
Got it, got it. That makes sense. And I would also love to understand the process of getting to these KPIs. And I know we've discussed this offline a little bit, where like there's different tech stack and data is scattered across places. Would love to understand what was it like when you started, what has been the process like, and what are some of the challenges that you're still facing?
So there are always challenges of data, right? And organizations are at different stages in their life cycle, as well as what their strategy are. There are sales-led companies, there are product-led companies, there are companies that emphasize customer support, account management, and all of those organizations are run a little bit differently with different personalities, different folks, different organizational structures. And at the very head of this, it really becomes is how much value does an organization put on its data? And while everyone's going to say it's very important to them, you'll really know by what investment they put into that. And now look, companies have competing priorities, again, at different stages in their life cycle. If you come in bootstrapped, you're not going to be spending a lot of money on platforms and systems because you simply can't. But as more or less what happens to a lot of companies is as they start growing and expanding their footprint, they'll start to change and professionalize their organization. And depending on how fast you're moving, that data, let's say cleansing, or that the value of the data that you're able to capture may not be a big hurdle to get over. And in some cases, it may be a huge hurdle. If you have a lot of decentralized data, that's non-contiguous, that was never, for example, tagged or dimensionalized, that becomes a really, really big challenge. And the more the company grows, the more it's going to look to its data for information and direction on not only how am I performing, but what else should I be looking at. So you drilling down at some basic KPIs and eventually getting down into certain cohorts is really going to give you more visibility into how your business is working, validating business plans, and again, performance. So at the end of the day, the very core of it is, how is your data structured? Where does it reside? What does it take to actually mine and sift through that data? I've been through a lot of different organizations at different levels, both large and small, startup, and it comes in all shapes and sizes. What I do know is you will hit some apex, some point in that company's journey where data is going to become incredibly pivotal. So you have a couple of choices at this point. It's going to be put that investment in and start to onboard your tech stack, the products that you're using into the operational platform, or you'll continue to try to do more with less. For a lot of folks, that means working in spreadsheets. And there's really nothing wrong with that. It's uber flexible. The more you use spreadsheets, the more you figure out how powerful they actually are, whether you're doing power queries, power pivots, whatever it may be. But again, the structure of your data has to be right for all of this to work in the right way. But you do outgrow that. And putting on, just whether you're on an ERP platform or just an accounting platform, that's one thing. And then adding a CRM platform, depending on how many transactions your organization goes through, your B2B, B2C, it's going to be really pivotal to start to take a look at your revenue subscription management side of the house, obviously to keep compliant with RevRec and other items, but just to manage the volume in and of itself. It all becomes very critical, and some of this really comes down to understanding the cadence of your organization and the business itself. What does that operating pace look like? And what you really want to keep an eye on is, where are folks spending their time, not only in finance, but across the organization. And my goal overall is try to minimize that administrative overhead and burden that comes with accessing data, finding data, and leveraging that data. The more you can do that, the more you can get people focused on their core functions and their core responsibilities. And that really means more value to the company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And because you also mentioned that, like, even to do all of these things, you need your data to be in place, right? You need your data structure to be in place. At what's like, actually, two questions. One is, what quality of data have you usually seen in organizations? How reliable is that? And at what point of time people actually start caring about cleaning their data or making it better? And what are some of the tactical steps that they can take at that point of time to make sure that it's more reliable?
Well, I have seen it at all different stages. Clean, messy, decentralized, to very structured. And at the end of the day, tactically, what you have to start to do is pick your priorities. What are you trying to solve for? Where are your pain points? And then you start to pick away at those pain points and go through it. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can go about that. You could, again, depending on where the priorities lie, you could obviously look to upgrade your tech stack, and that brings on some of its own challenges in and of itself. It's an investment, and in some cases around, you've got to make sure you have the resources to support that, not only from a capital side, but also from a headcount side. Ultimately, that's the place you really want to get to. Another option is really just to have someone wrangle all of that data somehow and start to clean it, wash the data, harmonize it, and then create controls, importantly, very important, and processes to make sure that the data remains clean on a go-forward basis. Historical cleanups are a different exercise that may give you a backward-looking view into how your company was performing for comparison purposes. We've actually gone through some of that, because what we've really done is just expand the level of detail that we can actually see at our organization. So we did go back historically at a certain point and started to tag and carve up our data going backwards. A lot of that was done on the accounting side. But we've actually now carried that through as we really step back and look at our procure to pay process and where all that data is sitting. We're starting to tag and dimensionalize data now very aggressively and very actively. And by doing that, it's giving us the insight we want, But what it also ultimately does is the more data we consume, the more we're going to want out of it. So we're actually being proactive and for example, just tagging data with other dimensions that will ultimately allow us to look in the future and have that data ready for when we would do want to slice and dice it in a certain manner. And that takes a little bit of patience. It takes a lot of attention and follow up. And again, but if you put those controls in place up front and processes up front, it becomes easier to manage. I would certainly say it's easier to manage when you're on a platform as opposed to doing that through manual efforts, spreadsheets, or otherwise.
Yeah, I would love to actually hear some examples of like data cleaning challenges that you face. And then what did you do about it? What are the kind of processes you put in place to make sure that then the data going forward is fine? Like just maybe some simple examples would really help.
So probably the simplest example is you take something which may seem very nascent and not very challenging, but even just customer names, for
Mm.
example. We have it's not only necessarily the legal name of the customer itself, but we also have internal monikers itself to track it in different ways. And if we find that we have customers, our customer data or just that customer name in 3, 4, or 5 locations and it's non-contiguous, how do we actually control that? So some of that's just done through user controls.
Yeah.
Who can actually update, edit, or add, let's say, a client name in a particular system or a particular area of our infrastructure. That's probably one of the simplest ways. And believe it or not, what that ultimately did was that sped up some of our data analysis because at those examples that I'm giving you, when we were extracting data that was mostly sitting in spreadsheets, and we were merging that with other data that was being pulled from CRM, for example, and other in-house custom systems. When someone was making a change, in just as easy as throwing a pivot table on something, you were realizing things weren't matching up and analysis became more and more complex. So putting that control up front eliminated a problem like that. But and that doesn't only apply to the customer name itself. It'll apply to all the different aspects of the data. So that's a really simple example of how we did that. If I wanted to expand on that a little bit more, even just on the OpEx side of our house, it would be to start tagging our data as much as we can. And this allows us to have a greater insight into our OpEx spend than we had in the past. And it makes the data more accessible and easier to manage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We had a dinner which we organized, I think, some time back, and there what some of the CFOs did was because a lot of salespeople don't end up entering their data in Salesforce. The incentives were then linked to Salesforce to make sure that you can enter the data there.
That's right, and we're going through some. We're really starting, for example, we're really starting to leverage our CRM platform, and because we have a lot of different eyeballs on that right now, and different people in there controlling really the data entry itself becomes very important. Is everyone aligned with the definition of particular fields? Are we going to be putting that same data in consistently? Otherwise, the output isn't going to be very relevant to us. So again, that's where a user control comes in. But it becomes really important that everyone's lined up about what they're supposed to be doing, what data they're supposed to be collecting, how it is defined. At that point, we start to see greater use and decision-making capability out of our information.
Yeah. And also because you touched upon the historical data, like now if you've been an organization for 16 years, there must be a lot of historical data that you have to then go and clean up to ensure that you get the right kind of insights. What are again some of the tactics that people can employ to make sure that their past data is also clean and then they're able to compare it with the future data in the right way?
Yeah, so that becomes very challenging, and depending on what type of data you're looking at, whether that's customer data, revenue data, just financial data in general, when you start to go back historically, it creates a whole nother dynamic. Let's say, for example, we go back, and I've done this in the past, is reorganizing chart of accounts. And you start to move things, in particular, if you started to move things from COGS down or you move things from OpEx up, for example, your comparisons now get thrown off. And when you start to do prior year comparisons, everything doesn't look the same. So you've got to actually start to segment that data. And if you really start to go back, one of the things I would do is keeping data live in one environment and then extracting data that you want to massage and use and keeping that separate. And you've got to be able to, and it's very important in the early days of doing this, when you start to wash that data or normalize that data, let's say the historical data, when you start to present it, you need to always keep a real keen eye on everyone's level of understanding. They may come with a preconceived notion or have certain numbers or figures in their head because they saw it a certain way. So taking the time to educate, let people know what moved, why it moved, why it was done. That sets the baseline, and then really just reiterating, hey, you may have seen gross margins here for some reason, but because we moved something here or here, it impacted gross margins, and this is going to be our new normal. So just kind of constantly sort of re-emphasizing that, making sure everyone is educated and up to date on that makes people's digestion of those figures, revised figures, much more impactful.
Got it. And who in the organization is usually responsible for something like this? In that case, is it just a finance team? Is it the RevOps department? And like across organizations, what have you seen now? Who have you seen being responsible for this?
So usually from my side, I've seen really the finance team more or less own that, FP&A folks, but it does certainly cross over RevOps, as well as some, let's say, there are some organizations I've been at that have very good, deep account management teams. They would also get involved as well. So what you definitely want to do with the data, and this is the overall theme of what I'd like to do with finance department, is making sure that finance is as pervasive as possible, working with the different groups, departments within the organization. And one of the ways you always do that is you're pulling them in when it comes to data conversations, and make sure they understand how it may impact them, and vice versa. They're going to tell you how changing data, historical data in particular, or go forward data, is going to impact them in the future. And what it really does is it just opens up the lines of communication, and allows you to start to be proactive, allows you to start to think forward, and allows for more robust conversations. And that takes a little bit of time. And I'm not going to say you don't iterate. There are going to be some things you just didn't take into consideration in some of those conversations when you were washing data or cleaning data. But you can obviously continue to tweak and iterate as you go. The real crux of it is to make sure you have a plan of what you want delivered in the future. Make sure you're adjusting that data in the right way, so you're meeting most of your goals going forward, and then you have the ability to be flexible and tweak as needed.
Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. Shifting gears a little, would love to also understand the type of KPIs that you or record right now, and how have also they evolved over the last few years. So which were the main things that you were looking at, which were like top 4 or 5 metrics that you were looking at on a daily basis, weekly basis, and how has that evolved over the last 2 years?
So we've gone through a pretty big revolution in terms of data utilization just in general. Traditionally, what the organization had done was primarily look at, let's say, logo acquisition, in general finance, like how are our sales trending, how are our margins trending, how is our OpEx trending, what are the ratios between R&D and revenue, sales and marketing revenue, for example. And as I started to build that out, I kept some of those ratios in place, provided more detail, and then really started introducing a lot of the SaaS metrics. So the basics right off the bat were retention rates, gross and net, and making sure that everyone had an idea of where we were historically and where we are presently and where we want to go. And again, to what I was saying earlier, it's educating people along the way and make sure they understand how it's calculated and what's going into it. And we definitely customize those metrics to fit our environment. Which is a little bit challenging from a maintenance side, because we are doing that manually. And let's say we will run and maintain, let's say, industry standard, and then we tweak it to our environment. After the net and retention, we want to start looking at CAC, cost of ARR, LTV CAC, because we do have a focus on the go-to-market, and there are actually some derivations of that as well that is really important, as well as operational efficiency. Even just something as basic as what is your revenue to FTE type of ratio look like is really important to us. So we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, again, while we may see it impact as we're putting investment back into the company, we may see that negatively impact some of those figures. But what we really want to ensure is that we start to increase that over time, and making sure, again, that people understand that this is not going to happen overnight. In our B2B world, we have a relatively slow sales cycle. Maybe 3 months could be fast, but traditionally, 3 or 4 months is pretty fast. It can go out as long as a year. So it's not going to happen overnight, but baking that into the ethos and setting that baseline and getting people used to looking at that sets a really good precedent for going forward. And that as we roll these out, for example, and everyone's used to them, then you move on to the next layer.
Yeah.
So a next layer, for example, could be, all right, let's really drill down into customer cohorts, which we've started to do, and we chop up cohorts in a number of different categories. But this becomes really, really telling, right? And this starts to help RevOps. This really starts to help that go-to-market team and the account management team understand what those features look like, what those characteristics look like, based on what we've had in the past, and what we're starting to see in the future. Our new customers, are those cohorts starting to look a little bit different? And in reality, is what our go-to-market strategy working or not is what we're actually targeting. Is that who we're actually onboarding? And there are great impacts from that. We could start to say, for example, you'd want to know, hey, are we actually onboarding the right customers? Because we're starting to see a lot of pressure come on our delivery teams before they actually hand it off to account management. And that's, if you're not looking at the business as a whole, that'll start to suffer, and you'll find out too late and down the line that you really weren't focused on the organization as a whole, and the impact that your go-to-market team can have.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you do look at customer cohorts and different variations. What are those different kind of cuts that you usually look at?
So revenue size is certainly one of those, as well as when they were onboarded. Becomes really important. The revenue size of our customers for us is pretty relevant, because that's when we're really trying to hone in on that idea of customer profile. So we want to take a look at who we actually have now, and we work through analysis like that to understand what the existing profile is and where we think the opportunity for us is in the future. And they're pretty much aligned, but we do see anomalies come in here, and there are exceptions that are made for certain reasons. But I found that from that aspect, it wasn't only sales that really consumed and really liked that data. It's obviously the C-suite, but then it's also the account management side of the house that really surprised me how much they actually enjoyed that data, and it gave them more thought into how they could actually, in reality, help shape go-to-market as well. And this is really the crux of it, which is really, really important. We can get people now to start to collaborate together on all of their efforts, because everyone's impacted one way or the other during that P2P process.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also touched upon LTV to CAC. That's an interesting one, because I think there's a debate in the market whether LTV to CAC is relevant, or at what point it becomes relevant.
That's right. I actually hesitated. Just something like it seemed like you had to calculate. It's certainly not my favorite. Particularly for an organization that, let's say, has really high gross retention, it can start to become not really a very relevant metric. But I think you should know kind of where you are, even if you just want to benchmark and say, okay, is it 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1, whatever that may be. And really the one that I've been focusing more. The two that I've been focusing on more as of late are the cost to acquire a dollar of ARR, as well as the CAC payback period. Those two for me is I want to make sure, again, that we're putting investment into the right area, and that we do start to see things trending. And certainly I'm going to see some anomalies pop up in the next 4 to 6 months or more. But again, as long as I start to see that trend in the right direction, then we'll be okay. So yeah, LTV to CAC is certainly not my favorite, but I do think you have to calculate it.
And how do you go about calculating LTV there? Because again, that has different definitions that people look at. So what's your version?
It does. You could probably find a half a dozen or more different ways to calculate that. We do a gross margin adjusted calculation on that, and certainly on the CAC side, we really drill down into let's really strip out anything that was not associated with a new customer acquisition. So that has to be done on a routine basis. The basis of your CAC cost has to be looked at routinely. Also, it's very challenging for organizations that are relatively flat or lean. And an example there is you may have, and we do, historically. We had some biz dev professional sales folks that actually had other responsibilities. And certainly counting them as 100% towards acquiring new customers is really not accurate, and vice versa. We had some tech folks that are, they're product experts, and they would get pulled in at certain times during the sales cycle. And if it worked, they get pulled in even more, yet their costs are sitting outside of CAC. So we've got to be aware of that, make sure we're pulling that in. And also even just the commission payouts, you have to make sure that you're applying only the commissions that were relevant to new acquisitions. So it's not as easy as it always looks if you just wanted to Google it and find that calculation. It never is. I say that becomes your base. At what you're looking at, and then sit down and you sit there and again cross collaborate, talk with your teams, explain the basis of the calculation, and then start to add the intelligence that's pertinent to your business. So yeah, there are a lot of moving parts. There are even ways, obviously, you can normalize for future cash flows using weighted average cost for capital, and that's something else that we'll probably do in the near future.
Got it. Got it. And for you to be able to calculate these things in the right way, and you touched upon it a little bit in the beginning, is what does the tech stack look like, and how do you think that will evolve for you in the future?
So we're in the process of evolving that. We've been very fortunate in the past. We've got a lot of tech savvy people at our organization. We've built a lot of in-house tools or customized in-house platforms to do things that they probably weren't meant to do. We've really reached the point where the need, and it's very evident in the operating cadence, right, that we're probably going to need some more tech solutions going forward. So the beginning of this, what really kicked it off, was levering what CRM can do. And part of that was get your central source of truth, get your data in there as much as you can, and then we can begin to pull from there to do other things. Having connectivity with the accounting systems is yet another example. Part of that feeds into RevRec conversations as well. But for us, I think there's a couple of things that we would look at for the tech stack or expansion of that tech stack. It's getting more out of what we're using today, and CRM is going to be number one there. And we've put some folks in place to do that. Subscription management and billing software and or FP&A software should be layered in there as well. And I don't think we could do it or absorb all of that all at once. I think you need to onboard it, leverage those tools, and get the most out of it that you can, and then begin to build out from there. So we have a great basis to build off of. And again, we are very fortunate, even though we do operate in somewhat of a siloed data environment, it is very well structured, very well controlled and organized. And that makes it much easier going into a tech stack upgrade. One of the challenges that we do have is in that our core product is very much a la carte. So even though let's say we have 5 categories of products that we sell to a customer, and there's the core platform itself, there are user seats, and then there are integrations that customers can subscribe to. There are data analytics and reporting they can subscribe to. But even in each of those segments, there are different tiers and different layers that they can actually onboard. And to give you an idea of example, so we have thousands and thousands of billing lines. So we're a high ACV, low logo, generally speaking, high ACV type company, but the data and the complexity in the data comes out into all of our billing lines. So we've got thousands of those, and right now it's being managed essentially through spreadsheets. It's now being pushed over to CRM, and we're controlling the data, which has been an enormous help. That's normalized a lot of the data, allowed us to tag the data effectively, and now we've got to find the ways to have our systems interact with one another. But it does become a challenge because we do have to extract that from either way, whether it's going to come from CRM or from existing spreadsheets, and that's how we have to manipulate that, create our revenue waterfalls and so on. And obviously this ties back to 606, and as well as some other items that you have to stay compliant with. So I think we're at an inflection point from that perspective. Other organizations that I've worked at in the past, I had a family office. We did a roll up of 7 organizations under one ERP platform. That was a very large effort, but in doing so, it allowed us to map all of the policies, procedures from the organization as it existed. We overlapped it with the ERP platform that we were using at the time, customized that platform where we wanted to and adjusted processes where we thought it was inefficient and that the new platform would take care of that. And at the end of the day, it's a very painful process. People still have their day jobs, but they have to get involved in these types of conversations, obviously, and you need input from everyone, finance, op, go-to-market, et cetera. Once you get over the hump and people are used to the new cadence, where to find the data, how to use the data, how to use the system in general, everyone looks back at that point and say, how do we ever survive without this? So it's always a win to upgrade your tech stack, I think, when it's, as long as you're doing that properly. And you have to put the right investment into it. It has to be sponsored from the executive suites and has to be given the right amount of attention for it to be successful.
Yeah. And actually, on that note, are there some processes that you thought that you should have implemented earlier, or
It depending. So yeah, so I mean, I've got different perspectives. There are organizations where I came in from scratch, other organizations that were either in turnaround or post-acquisition environments. This one is a scaling and growth. Were there processes that I think I should have put in place? Hindsight's 2020. I think it was more of selecting which priorities were actually going to benefit the organization the most. I spent an awful lot of time with data in and of itself, and it was expansion of data and data accessibility so it could be leveraged for FP&A and analytic purposes. That was obviously a huge focus, but there were other areas structurally that I also wanted to change. And I didn't touch the system side of the house until about a year ago, even though it was one of the first things we knew we were going to start to migrate, consolidate accounting systems, for example, because we have multiple legal entities and we were running on different platforms. So it was a no-brainer, low-hanging fruit. We knew that was going to be done, but I had to get a sense of what data was in there, how was it structured, and then develop that plan for how we were going to roll out a new tech stack. And there's a short-term plan and there is a longer-term plan. And all along the way, obviously, as you mentioned, there's what you're also thinking is, how do you refine processes now that you're going to be leveraging technology, and how are you going to put the controls in place? So I think for me, a lot of it was just figuring out what were the priorities. You have to agree on those priorities and then press forward. If I had it in a perfect world, I would have a group of people sitting around doing nothing in the early days but managing data, because that's at the core of everything. It has to be reliable. It has to be accessible. You have to be in a position to democratize your data. And once you're there, you're well positioned to start to leverage that data across the organization to make well-informed decisions.
yeah. Perfect. No, I think this covers a lot that I wanted to cover, and thank you so much for this. Just one final piece of advice for all the people who are scaling up right now, who are bootstrapped, post acquisition, what would that be?
Support your finance team. I say that because I also do some work for startup companies, and I love working with entrepreneurs and people that are disrupting markets and bringing value to the market. And it's easier said than done. You're probably, you're product focused. You're thinking about your roadmap. You're thinking about your addressable market, the customer profile, and so on. And not in every case, but a lot of times that finance side, the back office isn't given a lot of thought. But at the end of the day, as you start growing and scaling, you start to go, wow, this is really painful for me to go back and get the data I want out of it. And it becomes a very frustrating exercise, and it can be costly. But, some people do that in early days, and I give them a lot of credit. I've talked to a couple of companies just recently, actually, that have more advanced tech stacks than some 50+ million ARR companies do. And I say, good for you for doing that. It'll serve you very well in the future, as long as you don't have unfortunate cash runaways because you put so much investment into the finance side of your house. So I think you've got to do what's right, that aligns with the goals of the organization. Be realistic with it, but certainly get the base correct.
Yeah.
Get the base correct, and from there, your life becomes much easier going forward. And then once you start releasing that data out to the people that are going to consume it, always get them involved, and you'll realize that finance becomes really the centerpiece of an organization in many ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But unfortunately, I think people only realize it when there's something burning. But hopefully that's changing because again of the current macro environment where I think a lot more focus is being given to the KPIs.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, lots of different ways to do that, obviously. And if you can stop doing that manually, that's a big benefit, and it saves a lot of wasted time. You move over to platforms that do that for you. And again, now start shifting your focus towards more intense FP&A work and more proactive activities rather than just doing that administrative overhead of managing data.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you so much again, Craig, for being with us. This was very insightful. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Perfect.